They are so ritualistic. They pray to different deities, even though they don't really admit that's what they're doing.
Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Twitch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they. And as you might have guessed from the quote at the beginning, which actually is read by the amazing Mary Grace Faroon, who you might know from Italian folk magic, go check her channel out, I'll link it in the description below. Today we're going to talk about Catholicism and witchcraft, as it was voted for by you, my amazing viewers. Every Monday we have a new poll and you get to choose what I'm going to talk about, so check out the community tab for that. Also, before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators. And on there you can do a monthly donation, a one-off donation, or even buy a tarot reading with me Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. By the way, all the profits from my tarot readings for the foreseeable future are going to go in support of Cwtches to Gaza, who is a wonderful queer couple who are local to me, Amy and Soul, hi! And they are part of the mutual aid groups that help Palestinian people evacuate Gaza and resettle in Egypt. So, just so you know, if you get anything from me, it goes there. I'll also leave the link for Cwtches to Gaza so you can learn more about their work. I need to make a premise. If you are a Christian witch, this is not to take a dump on you. It really isn't. But as someone that was raised Catholic, I have a huge issue with the church as an institution. And I do genuinely believe that there are plenty of ways to honor and uphold Christian beliefs, if you so choose, without supporting the institution that oppresses so many people, because it needs to concentrate power in the hands of a few rich, white, het, cis, able men, who tend to be then priests that become cardinals that can be voted as a pope. Like, I don't need to tell you the level of corruption that there is in the church, but you know what, like, feel free to look into history, feel free to look into the Borgia to see what I'm talking about here. So in this video, we're going to look at the incredible similarities between witchcraft and Catholicism, and how a lot of Catholicism actually comes from witchcraft. There, I said it. We're gonna look into that. This is gonna be relatively brief. If you would like a more in-depth look at the way that the church affected witchcraft and the old pagan religions and then brought on the current system of capitalism actually, that's gonna be a video based on Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, and we're going to do it in some time because I only have just recovered from making capitalism and cottagecore, if I have. But if you want, that will be an option. This is mostly going to look into one example and then extend it. And this idea started because, get this, I was born and bred in northwest Italy in a very small village, and therefore I was raised Catholic. We are not hardcore Catholics in my village, but still, Mass was something that I used to be brought to. The last time that I went to Mass, I think I was 16 years old. And then I sort of realized that that's not necessarily part of what interests me, for the oppression, the misogyny, the homophobia, the way that the Vatican actually has an influence on Italian law, keeping us in the past for like 50, 70 years behind, which is currently still the case. A lot of far-right people in Italy wrap themselves with Catholicism to justify their reactionary views. So you can see why, as a fat, queer, autistic person of color, I wasn't necessarily so sold onto Catholicism more than just being brought up in it and then realizing, no, thank you. However, as you might know if you're here, I have tried to be a practicing witch for the last almost 2 years now. That is helping me a lot to reconnect with my heritage, because folk magic, traditions, superstitions is really what my entire village was based upon. It wasn't so much based on going to church and to mass, but it was based a lot around rituals that the entire village would come around. And usually, calendar-wise, they would be timed with religious events. My village is 600 people and it has 3 churches. Resistant as I am, something happened this year. At the beginning of 2024, I had this bizarre thought. I wanted to honor my grandmother and my grandfather, who are the main people that drove me to do ancestor work because they raised me. They were farmers. Unfortunately, they passed away a long time ago, but they were the good people of my family. Most of the pictures you see here, actually, of them and their families. They died a few years, one from the other, but they died within the same 8 days. Something that I realized in 2024, in January, was that the anniversary of my grandmother's death would have been on a Monday, and the anniversary of my grandfather's death would have been the next Sunday. So on that Sunday, I took this very weird decision of looking up if there was a Catholic church here in Cardiff in the UK. Here in the UK, mainly there are Protestant, Church of England churches, so I had to look up, but I found that there is a Catholic church. And the idea was, I'm going to go to Mass. Not because I believe or I like or I want to endorse it in any way, but because going there, spending an hour like that, because it's a kind of thing that I used to do with my grandparents, it's going to be me offering them that hour of my time, thinking and wanting to connect with them through something that we used to do together. So I went to Catholic Mass after over 20 years. The first thing is that I am used to Mass in Italian, because that's where I was raised. I do not recommend going to a Catholic church when you don't know bit by bit, word by word, what's going to happen, because people are going to look weirdly at you. They are also going to look weirdly at you if you have colored hair and wear anything but black and grays, and I think that has to do with the idea of humility. Yeah, right. Maybe actually that links into where we're going to go on these things. That was very interesting to me. The most bizarre thing is that I don't remember the reason why, but during the preaching, like why would you know? What's that part called? The sermon, thank you. The weirdest thing for me was that during the sermon, the priest that was doing Mass literally looked at me and talked about, oh, I'm glad to see that there are people that I've never seen before. And I was like, do I stand out that much? And I understand that, yes, probably in a Catholic church, I kinda do. Also, slight point, I never realized in Italy, because Italy is an incredibly racist and white country, but going to Mass here reminded me very strongly, if it needed reminding, that the Catholic Church, despite not being a country beside the Vatican really, which is not, is a very huge and problematic issue within colonialism. Like, I could see that there were people of heritage there that, why are they Catholics? Like, they're people of color. Seeing other people of color like me dragged into the limitations and the cruelty, in a way, of Catholicism made me realize, oh yeah, of course, missionaries. Missionaries were part of colonization, were part of the idea you need to be doing what us white people do, and you have two choices. You either convert and do our thing and become civilized, or we'll exterminate you, and that way your ideas will die with you, which is the reason why a lot of people of color today might be more integralist Catholics than even people like me that were raised in Italy. And that is indeed because their ancestors had to survive, had to very well bend their head and knee to the colonizer and the missionaries that were part of that project, and therefore they had to go to 11 with their devotion/reactionary ideas.
The term zeal of the convert is commonly used in popular culture, as it is believed that converts to new beliefs are likely to show more devotions than those born in the beliefs.
Besides the incredible hand that the Catholic Church had in colonialism, and still does,
is she concerned for the poor, the downtrodden and disenfranchised? That is what the invitation to Hex Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh a few years ago suggested Witchcraft is really for. While Catholic charities have cared for and upheld the dignity of millions of people whom the world seems to have otherwise forgotten, and no one has to get hexed.
Because all the charity projects, by the way, that Catholics do are conditional to you need to convert. Generosity.
I was raised Italian Roman Catholic. I recently started diving into a lot more Italian folk magic, and I can't help but feel like Catholics are a giant coven of witches under the guise of Christianity. Also, my nonna did so much witchy stuff. She would have never admitted to it as she was a diehard Catholic, but she did. She was superstitious too. I remember one year my mother got out of canning tomatoes because she was on her period, and it would spoil the batch. They are so ritualistic. They pray to different deities, even though they don't really admit that's what they're doing. There's a lot of chanting, etc.
There was one thing that, probably seeing it with the eye of the person that I am now, who knows enough about practicing witchcraft, made me realize, oh, Catholic Mass is a spell, it's magic. What they are doing, what the priest is doing, is gathering the energy of the people in the audience to cast a spell. The spell is the transmutation of the Eucharist, the wine and bread becoming the blood and the body of Christ. The peculiar thing that then made me want to look into this, and look into this I did, confirmed what I suspected.
Throwing a bucket of cold water on the witch's personal experiences will not be easy, particularly since one of the frightening aspects of witchcraft is that some witches do have, and blithely report, extraordinary preternatural experiences, incidents that could and should scare away many dabblers from playing with forces beyond their control.
So the interesting thing for me was to realize that it's not that the Catholic Church does not believe in magic. No, they absolutely do. Miracles, the Eucharist, the transmutation. But in Catholicism, the only people high enough, knowledgeable enough, trustworthy enough to hold this power are priests. Priests in Catholicism can only be men. Interesting how systems of oppression support each other. And so all the countries that want to be incredibly based on the religion, they usually choose a religion that is patriarchal, that is misogynistic, because what power does that uphold, if not the cis, white, het man? The entirety of Mass is literally gathering energy. That's why you see people like holding their hands up at some point. It's really bizarre. I do those things and I sort of remembered how it came in the Mass, because again, when you are subject to it, most weeks throughout your childhood, those things get stuck in your head without understanding what they do. Seeing them with the eye of the witch today, I completely understood. No. Like, very much in witchcraft terms, they gather energy, they channel that energy, and the idea at that point is you have to believe, because that energy from the congregation has been channeled. So regardless of the fact that it's still a wafer and still wine, they are intrinsic and imbued with the power of the blood and the body of Christ. Now, the funny thing to me is that up until the year 1000, under Charlemagne, it was made law that you couldn't believe in witches. If you were believing in witches, you were a heretic yourself. Like, witches did not exist. We went from that to the first Inquisition in medieval times against heretics. And then we got in the 1400s to the Spanish Inquisition, and we had the first act against witchcraft under Henry VIII in the 1500s, which banishes all magic, just in case. Because before that, and throughout the First Inquisition, the medieval Inquisition of 1100, and then the Witchcraft Act in the 1500s, the lines started to blur, and the idea was, well, witches are bad because they commune with the devil, but they were very aware that there were a lot of folk practices, the cunning folks. They were technically doing white magic, all those traditions, all those rituals that actually tend to be that ritualized because they are adjacent to the Catholic religion. what we do in Italy with saints, with ex voto, with asking for miracles. You need miracles, at least 2, for someone to be beatified first and then made a saint. So it is recognized that basically magic exists by the Catholic Church. The only thing is that, no, power needs to be in the hands of someone that we can trust, that we initiate and we choose, therefore, men priests. Because nuns, by the way, can barely say a rosary. They certainly don't do the magic part of transmuting wafer and wine into body and blood. Nuns are a very peculiar kind of woman with internalized misogyny, by the way. That would be interesting to look into. To give you an idea of how much Catholicism and the Catholic Church as an institution exist to uphold the power and concentrate it in the hands of a few men. You think that the Spanish Inquisition was just against witches, devil worshippers and stuff like that. No. It was against anyone who wasn't doing Catholicism your way. At some point it was against Protestants because they were heretics. They were considered heretics. Up until the 1500s, there were a lot of offshoots and branches of Catholicism trying to live religion the way that they felt was correct. Some argue that the High Priestess card in the tarot, because it was originally the Popess, is actually based upon some of these stories/legends. And I'm saying stories because some of them are documented, as in it's people that is being burned at the stake. A theory for the Popess genesis includes a Visconti ancestor, Sister Maifreda Visconti da Pirovano, who became an actual real-life Popess of a fringe Christian sect, until she too was executed for heresy. Maifreda was Popess of the Guglielmites, who believed in equality of the sexes and salvation for Jews, Saracens, Muslims, pagans, and other non-Christians. If that wasn't heretical enough, the Guglielmites also believed that their late founder, Guglielma, had been the female incarnation of the Holy Spirit, and that humanity would only be saved to creating a new Christian church led by a female pope. Sister Maifreda was elected to be that pope, and she led the Guglielmites until she was convicted of heresy and burned at the stake in 1300. As always, thank you, Charlie, for bringing us this amazing information. Radical Tarot, the best book on tarot and queering the tarot that you will ever find. Link down in the description below. I'm actually not paid for this. I just love Charlie and the work that they have done. Again, the interesting thing to me is that when you get confirmation that what you do is valid and exists by detractors thinking that they are actually coming against you, accidental allyship there, dare I say, is the equivalent of TERFs going to trans masks and saying, you will never pass as a woman because all that TERFs can think about are trans women. And then you go, yeah, accidental ally, yeah, you're very right, I will never be a woman. But you think that you're using that against me, that's so sweet and ignorant. To put a cherry on top of this moment of understanding that I had, I very quickly looked up Catholicism and witchcraft. And something that nowadays very rarely happens because each one of us is in their own algorithmic bubble. So we just hear from people and hear about things from the angle that we already are inclined towards. So for me, it's a lot of progressive leftist video essays, articles, blogs, Substacks, activism, that kind of thing. So I would very rarely end up on websites that are about Catholicism and the Catholic Church, as you might guess. But this time I went and actively sought after. What do Catholics think about witchcraft?
These are indeed important questions that deserve answers that can be found in their fullness in Christ and in His Church. But to say that witchcraft has uncanny similarities to Catholicism is to understate the matter. Witchcraft is an inversion of Catholicism. Catholicism emptied of Christ and stood on its head. This is most readily seen in witchcraft's approach to authority.
The witch puts inordinate power in herself or seeks to harness power that is not granted humans according to their nature. She wants to affect the world and people around her through subversive and often destructive means. She is dissatisfied by the fullness of the humanity given to her by God. She holds typical feminist grievances and finds womanhood infinitely powerful but sadly chained by the big bad patriarchy.
The witch is a woman who is broken, lost, and oftentimes angry. She is in pain, whether she will admit it or not, and it isn't a pain caused by the patriarchy or the injustice du jour. It is pain caused by missing out on God. She is seeking validation for her goodness, value, and beauty as a woman outside how God supports and nourishes womanhood through the Catholic Church. We ought to pray for her that she might turn with all the energy she has put into her false spirituality to love the one who loves her unconditionally and won't ever stop calling her home to him.
To me, the most impressive thing is that they literally say it mask off when they talk to each other. Oh, it's because they don't want to recognize the authority and they want to take the power in their own hands rather than being dependent on priests and on the church. They want to do things themselves. How dare they? Not recognizing the power and the authority that then would control them. And I am the last person that will ever kink shape anyone. But if they have a sub-kink, they can live with that, they just don't impose it on others. The fact that they take such hatred towards modern witchcraft because they dare taking the power in their own hands. Nobody said that you couldn't bend your head if you want and go to church and go to mass and wait for men that are priests to tell you what you need to do and believe, and only them have the power to gather the energy and transmute and do all the magic. You're more than free to do that. The problem starts when you start to invade someone else's freedom to tell them you should do like I do. You start to see why the church is behind all those movements, especially in America, of ultra-conservatives that try to take away reproduction rights from women, human rights from LGBT people, rights from immigrants. Do you start to see the connection here? You uphold something as old and patriarchal as the church and Christianity in general and patriarchal religion, and it becomes very easy to shroud yourself with the intrinsic power that that's supposed to bring and have. So my advice here is be very, very careful about throwing stones from glass houses, basically. But hey, the bottom line is, see, even Catholics do admit that magic exists. They use stuff that they've directly kind of mutuated, if not stolen directly, from cunning folks and pagan cults that existed beforehand. Never forget that the wafer, the round wafer of the Eucharist, it's very likely taken from the mola salsa, which was the round wafer made with the sacred water of the spring in Rome, that was actually offerings made for Vesta. The simple fact that all those images from paganism have been taken and transmuted into the images of the Virgin Mary. There is a lot there that has been taken from that. There is a lot from pagan cults that has been taken and brought into sainthood, and that's why you have Saint Bridget and then Bridget the Goddess. It's just that Catholicism has indeed that colonial mindset. I am coming towards something that already exists. I'm gonna cancel it, I'm gonna acquire what I like from it, I'm gonna rename it, I'm gonna make it mine, and I'm gonna tell everyone that nobody had that idea before me, so that they actually forget their own roots, and I am the only thing that they can remember and they can worship. And I think it's always important when somebody wants to limit the level of information and the level of sources that you can look into. Maybe they are not that solid in their statements, in their existence. It was absolutely beautiful to see what do Catholics think and say between themselves. There was one of the articles that I found that literally gave talking points of how do you challenge a witch? You know what? They don't actually believe in the devil, so how do you just bring them to the church and make them admit that they need to bend the head to God, to the church, and let the church do the stuff that they want to take into their own hands. It was very fascinating to see what their idea of indoctrination and basically missionary work towards witches was supposed to be. Good luck! Before I got to finish and upload and subtitle this video, something kept going on in my mind. I actually know directly, firsthand, a Catholic witch, Astrologica, who also hosts test tube and cauldrons. You've heard me mention them before. And I have the most extreme respect for their work. Some advice that they gave me has worked in my practice. So just bashing Catholicism besides the church is not what I intended to do here, although I do have strong sentiments about that. Being a queer person, like, who doesn't, especially when raised in Catholicism. So what I did was contacting Astra this morning, and this is recorded less than 24 hours before the video is out, so fingers crossed it is out. I got in touch, and she was beyond kind. She watched the video up until this point, and I asked her, I have a couple of questions, especially on the Catholic articles that I found, and she very kindly recorded this bit that is coming to give us her take as a Catholic witch. And if your mind is blown as mine, as how can there be such a thing as a Catholic opening practicing witch, Astra is going to explain it for you.
Huge thanks to Isha for inviting me to speak out on how I can be Catholic and an occult practitioner at the same time. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Astra, and I am a Solomonic ceremonial magician with a focus in the grimoire tradition. Before I begin, I want to admit that the Church has perpetuated great harm in the world in a variety of ways, many of which Isha has touched upon. And while a sorrowful heart can never pay for those actions, I do recognize the harm and would never sweep it under the rug. It is the responsibility of Catholics to hold our magisterium to the standards set forth by Christ and the Scriptures and call out harm when we see it being done. An important distinction to be had are the things that the Church teaches infallibly on faith and morals, what are considered to be the dogmas of the Catholic Church, and the widely held belief that Catholics do not have to adhere to, but are commonly believed. When seeing the Church from this perspective, I think a lot of people would be very surprised at the room there is for personal theological understanding, based in mysticism or in mystical understanding. And of course, the saints are excellent examples of this being put into practice. Sin in its fundamental form is something that separates you from God and draws you away from Him. For me, at least, my occult practice has done quite the opposite. I left Christianity initially and then found God again through ceremonial magic, through my relationships with the spirits of the stars, the angels who sing His praises, and the saints whose lives were touched by God in miraculous ways. In that regard, it isn't sinful to me because it drives me to participate in the sacraments, as I find myself in awe of the grace, mercy, and power God has in my life, and allowing me to engage in His creation beyond the physical. That being said, I do think someone who is contrarian to the Church and her sacraments is committing grave sin. Let me expand on that. For example, there are some practitioners who deface the Eucharist and use it for quote-unquote evil means, or means that are contrarian to its purpose within the Church. This is gravely immoral, in my opinion, because the core of such a practice is to intentionally warp and cause harm to the Church. Dare I say that most of these practices or traditions would be equally effective without this defacing, and so really it becomes an act of revenge, which is also sinful because it acts against the dignity of human life. There's no shame in leaving a religion you do not believe in and choosing to practice something contrary to it, but there is shame, I think, in choosing to degrade the beauty of a tradition for malicious purpose. Regarding the ritual and sorcery, I think a lot of people would be very surprised at the role prayer has in my practice. Nothing I do is performed without first praying for guidance. I pray before I divine and use a prayer from the Arbitel, a notably Christian grimoire, with the words, "Your will and not mine be done" at the end, just as Christ said in the garden, begging for God to remove the burden of drinking the cup of God's wrath on the cross. It is a promise, in essence, that all I do, even magic, falls within God's will. This is why divining before a particular working is so important to me. If I am told that it is a no at the time, or that I should not do a working at all, then I won't, and there is no argument from me to do otherwise. It is in this sense that even within my magical practice, I lay myself in the hands of God, who who created my true will and who helps me follow this path. Thanks to Isha for having me on, and I have loved the conversation so far, and I hope people get a lot from this video.
And thank you, Astra, for being so kind to share your knowledge. And if you'd like me actually to have a chat with Astra so that we can just ask and understand, because also you might have heard she's so good at explaining and teaching stuff, let me know. I'll give it as an option, and then maybe we can have a chat with her more. And until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the patriarchy together, because I think there's quite a need for it. What do you think?